So the idea of this panel is to go with this question, what is higher education? Who are we? Is the university a corporate entity? Is part of the business sector? Is part of this visualization of having, instead of having citizens become consumers, or what is a good aspect of this or not? So we will go around. I don't have any point and ask it to any one of you, but if you could actually say something about this idea. For example, with the concept of productivity, something that every time that we mention the word productivity, doesn't matter where you are, people will react. So what do you think about this idea?
Could you introduce people? So we
Yeah, they will. Okay, very good. Actually, you have it in there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Miguel Altieri. I'm a professor at UC Berkeley since 1981, actually. So I'm going to react to the talk basically from the perspective of a person that came to a public university, and today our administrators call it publicly assisted university. And I wanted to pick on two ideas that from the talk, that the ideology of automated education and education as a system, as a content delivery system. Where does this come from, and why is that now permeating our universities, and especially at Berkeley? I'm going to talk about Berkeley. It's no surprise for all of us that today's a globalized economy, nothing is safe from being privatized and turned into a marketable commodity. And actually, the appropriation of education is part of the strategy of the reproduction of the dominant model. That is the training of a new cadre of neoliberal capitalists. Education has always been as a service of capital, because actually after World War II, the whole idea was the development of workforce for industry. But today, in a globalized economy, a highly technological world, actually what's happening is the restructuring of the university along an industrial model to serve the corporate interests that dominate the transportation, food, and economic system. Now, automation of education, outsourcing, are just basically symptoms of a much larger reform that is happening. And the push, it was already said before, comes from, to make corporate schools reforms, comes from philanthropic foundations, Gates, very important, Walton, Dale, etc., which actually put in place leading representatives of monopoly finance, information, or retail capital. And in that way, what's happening is that the university has become part of the corporate system. It's not separate, at least at Berkeley. For example, we have BP given $500 million to the University of California, Berkeley, to produce transgenic biofuels. And obviously that changes the character of, first of all, the direction of the research, which is supposed to be public good research in the interest of foundations, and also changes the character of education, the delivery of education, the content of education, and so on and so on. So basically, what is happening at Berkeley is that the administrators, it's interesting, there's kind of a consent that is fabricated, in which everybody agrees that outsourcing education, automation of education, teaching about biotechnology, teaching about things that are useful for the corporate sector are important through, first of all, private corporate funding of the university industry relations. Then this construction of this apparent consent is through buying opinion of scientists that get funded by these big monies. For example, when we had a campaign for labeling genetically modified foods last 2 years ago here in California, suddenly $1 million per month went into the universities, Stanford and Berkeley, to buy the opinion of scientists are saying that there was nothing wrong with GM foods. The political investment, that is putting people with corporate mindsets in the administration of the university, propaganda, media, public relations, and obviously the repression of alternative and opposing views. So just basically to finalize is my point here is that the administrators that we have are basically linked to these corporate donors, and their focus is on development. That is, that the universities are sites for corporate research and development, which the products that are going to be produced are patented and or controlled by different mechanisms. And so the focus is on revenue enhancement, fundraising, and I think this whole virtual university programs that are in place. I mean, there's a huge push for online education at Berkeley through Google and all these mechanisms that you were discussing. It's just part of that. Thank you.
My name is Rich Copenhagen, and I am a student here at Peralta. I served for a year and a half as the president of the statewide student senate that represented the full system, all 112 community colleges to state legislature, the state chancellor's office, and a number of other state boards. And I also served here on the board of trustees as student trustee for a year. And so I will be transferring out of this system in the fall to Cal State East Bay.
I'm Matthew Goldstein. I'm the president of the Peralta Federation of Teachers. That's the faculty union here in the Peralta Community College District. I also come out of the English department at Laney College. So I'll admit that when Audrey was talking about the automatic grading machines for composition, I was wondering if I could take out a fourth mortgage and buy myself one. All the problematic dimensions of automatic grading notwithstanding, of course. I guess the one point I wanted to make before I hand the mic down the line here is the conversation around privatization often circles around corporate contributions to universities and colleges, but one of the related aspects of privatization that often gets overlooked is the fact that tuition, of course, is soaring, and there's a parallel type of privatization going on, and this is felt very acutely here at the community colleges, and that is individuals are forced to bear a larger and larger share of the cost of educating themselves, and the public is increasingly withdrawing from public education. So again, those are two sides of the same coin, but I like to place that into the conversation about privatization as we move forward in this discussion. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Abel Guillen, and I'm happy to be here. There's so many thoughts racing through my head, and I guess I just wanted to point out before we get into the full discussion, give you an anecdote of kind of highlight the sentiment that Professor Altieri talked about. When I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley, I was fortunate to receive a scholarship to get into Cal, becoming the first in my family to graduate from college. This was a privately funded scholarship, and there was immense pressure to do something with that, as it is for anyone who's the first in the family to go to college. But in particular, I remember going to a reception probably halfway through my first year, and all these donors came around, all these funders came around, and the thought was that I was going to major in, I was going to go to the Haas School of Business because that's what I needed to do, and get into the Haas School of Business, and they call it the Palace up on the hill for those of you that are familiar with the campus. But I actually fell in love with sociology. And I went to, and I was talking to an administrator on campus, a high-level administrator, I think he was a vice chancellor at the time, and I told him that, I changed my mind, I really dig sociology, that's something that I want to go into. And this high-level administrator proceeded to tell me what a waste that would be for someone like me with this opportunity, getting a full ride scholarship to go to Berkeley, to go into something like sociology. And that wasn't, that I should really think about that. And that really pissed me off, obviously. But it was a sentiment that the university places in terms of what do people value, what is valued here. And it was a disappointment, if you will, to the donors and to these people in the program that I was going to be pursuing a degree in liberal arts and humanities as opposed to the hardcore sciences. And so that really puts into light, I think, a lot of the pressure of where the university is. And just to give you an example, a couple of quick facts. In 1987, the state of California actually provided about 55–56% of funding for the university. Today, the state of California only supports 12% of the university's budget. And for the first time in history, last year, there were about $313 million actually in private funding that was raised through philanthropy, through these donations and whatnot, actually outpaced the level of state support. So that kind of shows you how the funding mechanism, how the makeup of the university's funding and how that sort of changes the orientation of the purpose of the university. So look forward to continuing that discussion.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jose Ortiz. I'm I almost hate to admit this, I'm the chancellor of the Peralta colleges. And I do have a thought I want to share. And after hearing Audrey, I too have lots of things going through my mind, because the whole conversation about robots and robotics that actually touch on many industries, including the health services that we deal with. But I think the fundamental issue for me is the whole question of ideology. And it's not only ideology in terms of ideological imperialism, that was the term used also, but it's also ideological hegemony. And I think we all need to be clear, everyone here in this room, that regardless of where you stand on the issue of, the privatization of education, productivity issues, et cetera, we are all victims of, as Don Miguel says, a capitalist society. This capitalist society, it's taken a form that has dominated our culture and is also trying to dominate the rest of the world. Let's not fool ourselves about that. And of course, capitalism, if you've read a little bit of Marx or Gramsci, is based on greed. So this greed that is permeating the rest of the world is, of course, infiltrating all of our systems. And higher education becomes the instrument of ideological hegemony, where we, whether you are a student, a professor, or an administrator, live this contradiction that we may ideologically be opposed to, but in practice, we live every day. And I think there's a discussion that needs to be had, or can be, a conversation, understanding the contradictions that we're living, how we mitigate some of that. And I know there are people who are having those conversations and are making efforts to, humanize the experiences we're having. But it's also within a larger ideological hegemony that if you go back to the literature of, and you mentioned, Audrey, revolution, but the only way you change that is, through a revolutionary movement. I mean, the system is so big, the system is so dominant that we can have these conversations all day, every day, and where's the change going to be when politics and education, and Audrey, you said it, all of this is a reflection of of economics. And the economics is dominance of what we do. So those are my little comments. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Carolyn Van Putten. I teach psychology at Laney College here in Peralta Community College District, and I am the president of the District Academic Senate, which affords me the privilege, the pleasure, and the responsibility of being a faculty advocate and representative in many different areas throughout the district. The one thing that I want to say before I pass the microphone to Cleavon and we further engage in a dialogue is something I started saying back in '94, I think it was, when I taught a class at J.F. Kennedy University. And that was this one phrase, the internet has changed everything. And I don't think we really have yet begun to grasp what that means, or even realize that it's true.
Hello, I'm Cleavon Smith, and I am English faculty here at Berkeley City and the college Senate President, Faculty Senate President. And yeah, just looking forward to the conversation, and I'm going to follow Rich's lead and just let everything else come out in conversation.
So yeah? Oh, yeah, okay. So going back to this, just to drop a question, and you guys, anyone who wants to say something can. You chance to talk about the system, and today, this morning, when I was walking my dog, thinking about what we're going to talk today, I thought, so the system is the issue, but we are the system. And if we are not the system, we're in trouble. It's no way to go back. Because if I'm not the system, I'm outside, not only outside of the ideology, but also outside of reality. If I am not part of Peralta, just put it as a small system, then Peralta is an entity that nobody controls. What do you think about that?
Well, I think part of what makes this so difficult, and also is, what makes it so beautiful in a lot of ways, the struggle, is the conflict. It's just the natural conflict of our responsibilities, our duties, our identity. As educators in this country, at least, we are part of the ideological state police, and then how do we work within that to also be, part of, like this culture of thought, of critical thinking, in the sense of like really challenging the status quo. But in so many ways, our identity is to help further realize the status quo. So that conflict is just inherent in our being, and I don't think often we really embrace that conflict. And so in some of the ways we find ourselves, holding on to one identity or the other completely. So we're fighting, and we get so caught up in the fight to just pick up the crumbs that are left on the floor, that at the end of the day we forget, those relationships that are integral if we want to really talk about like changing the system, changing culture and revolution. We have to make contact with each other and not always be in conversation with terms. And so I think sometimes we're much more comfortable spouting terms, relating with terms, really figuring out, like coming up with different metaphors, much more comfortable with that than really looking and seeing the people that we're relating with and interacting with, and really bringing the conversation back to students. When we have these conversations, students are so left out of it. And so I just think, I would like for us to be a little bit more reflective, personally.
To connect with the theme of this experience that we're having right now with respect to adjunctivism, which is a new word to me, Cleavon just mentioned the effect on our students of what we do. And one of the things we're reasonably clear about, at least research has supported it, and it's been our personal experience, is that the more adjuncts we have teaching our students, the fewer students we are probably able to capture and engage in the process of what it is we have them here for, which is learning. It has a direct impact on their ability to learn, their willingness to engage, and what it is that we are able to provide them as support for doing all of that. There are far too many, we know that, adjuncts compared to the number of full-timers, but there are two questions that I have about that issue that I don't expect to get answers to, but I hope that we will at least begin to reflect on, because they may not be answerable. One of them is, how would the educational structure have to change to include even half of the adjuncts who want to be full-time, and is that even viable? And another question would be, what can or should be done to correct, if that is the best word to use, the full-time contingent faculty imbalance? Those things are all connected, as Cleavon said, to the people who come into our classrooms every day and night to, as several of my students said, when I asked the question, why are you here? They said, to get a job and have a better life. And I was a little astounded by that, partly because it wasn't what I went to school for, although it was an outcome of what I went to school for. That wasn't what prompted me to go back. When I talked to my colleagues about that conversation, they say, yeah, that's what they want. They want to get a better job and they want to have better lives, and that's why they're here. Is that why we're here? I don't think that's why most teachers are here. I think we're here because we believe that people are benefited by learning things that can change their lives. And yes, one of them is getting a better job, but there are lots of others too.
Miguel wants to say something.
Well, I just wanted to mention that, we're part of the system, but we're also part of the contradiction, as the Chancellor said. And I have lived this personally at Berkeley, and I wanted to give you a concrete example. Definitely, the dominant forces in my field, in agriculture and environment in Berkeley, it's basically following the influence of the big corporate donors, Novartis, BP, big money, $500 million grants, that kind of thing. However, Berkeley is part of what is called a land-grant university, and we're supposed to be serving the farmers, and there was a struggle not too long ago about a public land in Albany that belongs to the university, and the university wanted to develop it. And students got involved. I think it's important to get involved with students, but that's not enough. You need to get involved in social movements. And what happened is that there was an occupation of that piece of land by students and people from the public, to the point that today the university have to back off from privatizing the land, selling the land, and now there is a community urban agriculture project going on in that piece of land, and it's going to be going on for a long time, because the pressure came from the social movements to basically make the university accountable for its public mission. And this is happening. Unfortunately, social movements are not well organized around education, I think, in California, in the US, because if the public started pressuring the state to put money on public education again, like it's happening, for example, in my country, in Chile, after Pinochet, there was a privatization of education. Now, the new president has in the agenda to make the university education free again, after 20-some years of privatization of the university through neoliberal models that were imposed by Pinochet. So I think that's possible only if you have the public pressure and the public and the social movement behind that.
I guess I'm thinking about the system that we live in here in California. We're all very familiar with the master plan for higher education, and the concept of how the master plan for higher education was organized. And it's always been sort of a contradiction for me in terms of how we allocate resources in the state. As a trustee, as president of the board, we've had to deal with issues around cutbacks and whatnot over the years. Very difficult decisions had to be made. And as a board member, you think you have the power to change things, you have the power to move things around, but we're operating in a system that's very confining. So in the case of higher education in California, I propose that the system just, the system as it is, recreates inequality in society. When you have a higher ed system that gives $25,000 per UC student, that funds students to the tune of $25,000 at UC level, that only teaches a small number of students. Compare that to what we have to deal with at the community college, where we deal with the masses and we are doing it on a shoestring of $5,000 a year. That system, I think, in many ways recreates that inequality. And in some cases, I would argue that it creates the illusion that everyone has access to opportunity and education to control the masses. But at the same time, it's very difficult to break out of that system and change the system from within. I think we really need to have a serious conversation in California about how we're organized in higher education and really discuss what the purpose is of higher education. If it is in fact to serve the needs of capital, we need to be explicit about that, because we're not. And I think it's a farce when we tell our students that, when we tell, I was around a group of 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds yesterday, and I told them that I'm the president of the board of trustees. And I told them about if they knew what Laney was, American College, and Berkeley City College. And I told them that you all have the ability to go to college. As soon as you turn 18 and you want to attend, you can all go to college. And the kids got really super excited because everyone's been telling them that they can go to college, they should go to college. But in reality, is that system that we have in place today going to be available in the same fashion that has been historically? Community college used to be free. Now we're charging $46 per unit. At Long Beach City College, the legislature approved a bill to allow differential fees for the community college. So if you have the money, then you're able to pay for your education. And if you don't, and the classes are full, sorry, you're out of luck. So there's a lot of those issues that are floating around here, but I think we need to look at the system of higher education, how we're organized not only in California, but throughout the U.S.
Johnson,
Thank you, and I too want to comment or piggyback on what both of the gentlemen have said. I think that the reform of this system, while we, for the last, 20 years, I was concerned that the future for reform was bleak. But now actually, as Audrey talked about, the internet has now created a social networking phenomenon that has been able to mobilize that social movement for change. And so there's, in my view, hope there that the critical thinking about this system can be mobilized to social change. But it also reminds me of that great philosopher, Mr. Larson, the cartoonist, who I guess his caricature is on the dark side. You might remember that. He had a cartoon about the internet. He had two dogs looking at a terminal. One dog says to the other, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So there is potential there, but the human element is the one that has to come out from behind this internet screen and create change. Thank you.
Actually, I do, yes. For the first time in the history of consciousness, you can learn anything you want to learn without leaving home. Anything. I used to say almost anything, but that's not true anymore because of YouTube. It's anything. So, all right, given that, yes, the internet is anonymous in that you can be a dog and no one will know because you can not necessarily talk like one. But given that that is possible, that it is made possible, something that has never been true before in our knowledge history, clearly we have to adjust what we do as educators to reflect the significance of that shift. And I don't mean we should be turning our students into people who watch YouTube videos, or we should be flipping our classrooms and giving them lectures online. What I mean is we need to be incorporating the resources that are accessible through that tool in the way we teach whatever it is we teach. And I don't think it matters what we teach. We can find ways to incorporate the resources available through that tool to benefit our students and to free us from the perception that what we're there to do is tell them things, because that's not what we're there to do anymore. And one of the things that occurs to me as I was listening a moment ago is perhaps one of the reasons why, oddly enough, education needs to be disrupted to the extent that it is suggested that it needs to be disrupted is precisely because of the ways in which we have automated how we've done teaching assessment in the past. Multiple choice testing, I would like to think the anathema of learning, but I am aware that there are some places in our knowledge base where it is helpful to be able to do multiple choice testing. There are some things we want people to be able to memorize. We don't want the doctor or the dentist or the nurse to be looking up how to deal with us when we are in an emergency situation. So we want them to memorize some things. But we also want them to be able to think critically about how to apply that information. So despite the fact that, well, because all of us are not going to be doctors, dentists, nurses, or other kinds of healthcare professionals, radiologic technicians, whatever it is, we're going to do some other things. So given that, where is multiple choice testing in that scenario? We do it, we have done it as teachers and educators because it's easy for us. That's my perception. It makes grading easy. It's ridiculous, but it makes grading easy. Now what? We're going to fix that? We could, easily. But it requires much more work for us to do.
Talking about
Our students are very quiet here in the bottom. So I was thinking how is this vision that we see from power, from the board, from instructor, but how you see it from the student, because they are the last ones to be asked for.
Well, I was listening to what everybody said, and I've worked with most of the people on this panel before, and you know, this is not a conversation unique to Laney BCC, Laney. When I was working a lot in the state legislature, figuring out kind of what the process for change there was and how things happen, and working on a plethora of different student-related issues, it kind of becomes apparent. You start doing this work, or you start being a student or a teacher thinking, I'm gonna change things, I really wanna fix everything, there are all these problems in the world. And you start working on it, and maybe you start teaching a class here, and you get involved in a committee, or you get involved in some events that are going on. And there are, as the chancellor was saying, there is this pervasive system that is, then you were saying, is everybody, but at the same time is almost nobody, because it's essentially an ecosystem where different forces are pushing back against each other to accomplish their own needs, right? To accomplish their own ends. And so when you're fighting against that system, it's almost impossible to truly be a single beacon against, what you perceive as an evil agenda. In this case, we're talking about MOOCs and automation of education and kind of the commodification of what we think should be, or at least a lot of us think should be, a more human experience. And these people that you end up working against, so I've been in committees talking in opposition to bankers or to private schools or to those institutions or companies that are promoting ideas that I think aren't good ideas. And it turns out that they're just on the other side of this system, this ecosystem. They're another factor that happen to be a lot stronger than we are because they've slowly built up that power, and that's kind of what we're based on. But as to the Chancellor's point, we all need to be a part of changing the system. And so from a student perspective, I think that the most important thing that I ever learned in community college is how to think independently from what we see as success. And I was watching this TED Talk, I'll shut up in a second. I was watching this TED Talk, I'm just kidding. I was watching this TED Talk where and it was a couple days ago, that was talking about how success in our culture has basically railed us on what is sort of an evil path, and that how important failure is. And what I learned in community college, and I've been here way a long time as a student, which I love, but you know, my mom would like to see me move on to more profitable things. But in any case, the benefit of failure that I learned in community college is that when you start to stop seeing success as this one thing that everybody looks at, that our culture has said is to get a big house, to get a boat, well, I don't know, whatever nice things to be able to provide for your family. When you stop seeing success as that narrow field, you're actually able to accomplish real change and go down a path that, you know, we could take this technology stuff, that we can really accomplish great things rather than being railed onto getting specific grades or being able to efficiently manage your essays or whatever sort of successful technology implementations there might be. You can have that back now.
So what is the role of the unions on this? Because not many actually words like the union will produce such an effect.
Right, so as the union boss here, I guess I need to weigh in pretty strongly on the side of organized labor. I guess one of the points I wanted to make is that it's really useful and interesting to be part of this broad philosophical discussion, and have to admit I had a little frisson when our chancellor name-checked Antonio Gramsci. That's very unusual in our circles. And those of you who are Googling madly right now, it looks like Gramsci, so Gramsci. But what I wanted to say is that on a daily basis, as you know, union boss in this district, I spend very little time thinking about the system or about the contradictions of late capital or any of the things I spent a good part of my time at graduate school studying pretty intensely. My days are really made up with trying to get people paid, trying to get folks access to their sick leave, getting PowerPoint projectors delivered to their classrooms. So I'm always sort of taken aback, and this is probably more reflection on my own naivete than anything else, when the union's characterized as an evil force or I'm a union thug or something, because again, daily, what our union is involved in is this really concrete, low-level, brass tacks stuff. So again, I find it really, really helpful to hear this discussion, because it sort of reminds me that there is this theoretical argument for our existence, as well as this practical one that we at PFT are carrying out daily. This is only a marginally related point, but I think demographics are in some ways determinative. And the fact is, we have 75% of teachers in higher ed are part-timers now, right? So that's the future of education. And my rather facile solution, of course, would be to organize those folks pretty thoroughly, because again, that's where it's at. We've overproduced PhDs and MAs, that's part of the system too. Joe's shaking his head emphatically.
Because there's not enough jobs, there's not too many PhDs. There's plenty of need.
I'll take that, yeah. But the point is that, you know, some overwhelming majority of our faculty are part-timers, and they are going to call the shots, right? So it's important that we figure out a way to incorporate them into higher ed in a more satisfying way, one that will serve our students better, as Carolyn and Cleavon have pointed out, and one that will honor the work of a great majority of higher ed faculty.
So a lot of what we're getting at, you know, we're just talking about resources and how the lack of resources really straps us and gets us having into conversations that are so far removed from, you know, classroom learning and you know, and we're talking about mobilizing, and Abel mentioned earlier about how little the public is actually funding higher ed now compared to years ago. And we see that, you know, in a lot of ways, demand for higher education hasn't necessarily changed. It's the demand for access to higher education, which has mostly changed. And so when we look at the demographics of who we're serving in the classrooms, it's a completely different demographic than the majority of the students, you know, 40 years ago. And we're not educating, this is no longer a network for those that have to continue to have. It is more of a network of you know, we're talking about, you know, and the conversation going in is around equity, and then once students get in, and part of the larger conversation and narrative, you know, has reduced this idea of equity to, you know, earning. And that's tragic, but I think one of the things that we can do as educators to help mobilize the public on our behalf is make our students' learning visible. Make our students' learning visible to our students, make our students' learning and meaningful and visible to their family and friends, make our students' learning meaningful and visible to the communities that we live in and serve. And so we talk, you know, we have this opportunity as the community college, because frankly, the UC Berkeley's, the MIT's, the Harvards, they serve so few of the students that we're talking about that, you know, frankly, leaving the conversation at that level just seems almost ridiculous. Well, you know, computer hackers don't focus on Apple because it's such a small market share. Yet in higher ed, we always focus on the small market share for some crazy reason. But why are we not leveraging the learning that's happening in our classrooms as a way of mobilizing the public on our behalf? You know, and so I think that's just, you know, not only does that mobilize the public on our behalf, but it engages our students a lot more, and it engages us a lot more. And so in some way, you know, I think, you know, I would just love it if the conversation could kind of cycle back to that moment of contact.
Before I hand the mic over to Joe, Cleavon's raised a few issues that I was thinking of in a bit wider perspective, and that is access and equity. It doesn't just refer to students, it refers to faculty too. When you think about the other thing he mentioned, which is that most of the students in our classrooms don't look like the group of students that we had 40 years ago. In fact, they probably are 60 to 70% people of color, and most of the people who teach them are 80% not people of color. Where's the access and equity there for people of color who could teach? Where's the reflection for those students of people of color that they need to see having been successful at helping to stimulate learning and having been learners themselves? And how could we possibly change the structure to include more people of color as teachers? It probably isn't possible, which is a ridiculous thing to say in the 21st century, that something's not possible. But when we look at how our structure is developed and how it's designed, in order to put more people of color in front of the students of color, we'd have to take the whole system apart and start over again.
So we can use the last 10 minutes for questions. So since Joe is going to say something, we open it to everyone.
A couple of times it's been reference of the public withdrawal of interest or funds in education. I believe this is not the case. The public is very interested in education and has always supported any bond or tax that was levied for education. What is missing is the corporate participation in education. 30, 40 years ago, 30% of public funds were corporate taxes. It is now 7%. There is where the problem is. The corporations are not paying the bill. Thank you.
Any other question? Okay, well, starting this way.
Well, a recent study just came out, I mean, what we're seeing at the university level is a reflection of what's going on at the society at large. I mean, the largest numbers of billionaires ever now in the United States, and if you look at, indicators of infrastructure, education, et cetera, that they don't compare. So taxing the rich is definitely one way of doing this. And for that, you have to have social movements that are going to have to pressure that.
To your point about corporate investment in education, I just started working maybe 4 months ago at a tech company in Silicon Valley, and I always had there was always this conversation about how people don't get careers anymore. You don't stay at a company very long, and you're really only invested in you when you're out in the workforce these days, right? And it struck me because one manager that was hiring somebody for something, I overheard him talking, and he said, "This guy's been working at Toshiba for 17 years. I don't think we want to hire him because he probably hasn't had a lot of experience around in other companies," when he had really done an awesome job at this one company and they had kept him for a really long time. And the reason I think that corporations don't participate in any of this community building or people building or those sorts of things is because nobody's really invested in the corporations themselves. They're only there to make their money, and so they're only interested in the bottom line. And so there's no value to them to invest in whatever supply the corporation has for people, right? The workforce supply, our colleges.
Pass it on to me. So I just want to make one final comment about whether it's corporate investment or what have you. We've said it already several times, politics is a reflection of economics. And when it comes to the corporate investment, we are a highly legislated state, we are a highly legislated country, and it's up to Sacramento and Washington to tax the rich. They're not doing that. And if there's any social movement and pressure to change that corporate investment, I think it needs to also be focused on those politicians, the legislature, who, coincidentally, many of them reflect that corporate structure. And many of them, of course, are reluctant to tax the corporations. And, that whole phenomenon, because that's another discussion, maybe a whole another conference for that matter. But, that the power, the political power in this country is with the corporations. And they do not value equity and access because, I guess as Rich has just said, their myopic view of the world and profit making. If there's any change going to come, I believe that social movement. And there's lots of arenas for us to pursue social and political change. But in the end, I think Sacramento and Washington, D.C. need to be a focus. Thank you.
Is there a question in the,
That's all right.
Yeah,
because I can wait.
No, no, go.
okay. Oh, you want to say something, so I took the power from the
Okay.
Senate.
A few years ago, I read a book that probably several of you in the room are familiar with, Jeremy Rifkin's The End of Work. And it changed my understanding about everything that I do as an educator. Someone in this body earlier today made a comment about what are we going to do with all those people who no longer have jobs. And in one of Jeremy Rifkin's follow-up books, The Empathic Civilization, he talks about what we could probably be doing with all that energy instead of the things that the robots can do better than us. And that will make things cheaper so that everything that we can have no longer needs to have that much labor put into it to get. So what are we going to do instead? We are going to do things that are of service to one another. We're going to become better human beings. One would think that might be possible. And in addition to how to do that, certainly it's not going to happen through the kind of assessment methodologies that we mostly use today. But I suspect that if all of us who are educators were able to look at two areas of teaching and learning that can be applicable to any subject matter, and that's inquiry-based and problem-based learning, if we use those approaches to organize how we engage with the material that is our discipline specialty, we would have the students doing the work in the community that would allow them to show what they learned. We would have them doing the work that would allow us to show what we helped them learn, and that would let the community do what it needs to do to be stimulated to make the changes that must happen politically if we took a different approach to how we teach them.
I'm really glad that finally that issue of revenue and taxes and who pays and where it goes, because that's the other half, right? At the state level, way too much goes to law enforcement and prisons, the national level to war, right? I mean, that's the other half of it, is that priorities are completely screwed up. But I'm really glad that this topic came up, because without resources, we're all just, blowing it out of our elbow. And the political, the economic part of political economy gets, left aside, and all you're left with is pure ideology, which is not a useful conversation. But I want to underline, I think the pendulum is swinging in terms of public opinion. In fact, has swung in terms of public opinion. It hasn't been ratified yet strongly enough nationally in terms of legislation, but it is, and I think it's demonstrated by the passage of Prop 30 here, and the passage of a tax the rich measure a couple of years ago in Oregon, and the fact that such things are being raised, as well as minimum wage, which is the flip side of that, right, across the country. And I want to underline, too, where that comes from. It comes from one of the key elements of any social movement that has arisen in the United States in the last 200 years. That's gross, but more or less, which is the workers' movement. Where did Prop 30 come from? It came from the California Federation of Teachers. That's where it came from. And it forced Jerry Brown to change his original proposal to be a much more progressive proposal, and forced him to finally campaign on it in a way that could get it passed, which was tax the rich, as and it needs to be said out loud, that's where it came from. And that's, it doesn't always come like that from the labor movement, but it can. And I think it's important to say that out loud, and to say that, that the PFT is a proud part of that organization, as is, the other locals, my other local, the San Francisco Federation of Teachers, San Francisco Community College Federation of Teachers at City College, which they are now trying to close for doing all the right things that people are here saying that people should do to push back against these forces. Those are the reasons they're trying to close City College. Literally, exactly. Too democratically administered, treated contingent faculty too well, cut from the top when the budget cuts came, retained programs, trying to do too much with too little. These are the things that the creditors are using as reasons to close the place down. Literally, spending the reserves, spending the rainy day money in the rainy day. I could go on and on, but thank you very much. And, if anybody wants to react to that screed, I'll be happy to listen. Thank you.
The conversation, in particular around MOOCs, has sort of brought to the forefront this notion that 75% of the instructors at universities are contingent labor. And it's sort of surprising that for many faculty sort of didn't notice that. Like they didn't look around the room and realize that the majority of the classes that were being taught by their colleagues were being taught by those who were adjuncts. I think this question that I tried to sort of highlight in my talk is sort of who's doing the work is really important. And for me, and whose work gets recognized. For me, when I was a graduate student, I was a member of the Graduate Student Union, and I think it was important that the NCLRB recognized that graduate students were university employees as well as students. And I think right now, one of the questions about what work matters on campus, people talked about the importance of research and the funding around research. But interestingly, one of the things that I find very hopeful right now is these conversations that we're having about the work, the labor that student athletes do. And this idea that hopefully we'll get recognition for the fact that they are also doing work that the university is valuing, that the university is profiting off of. So again, I think that the social movement, and I do think that the pendulum is swinging to have these sort of crack open these conversations about labor. So I have a lot of hope actually that student athletes in particular, which is definitely part of something that a lot of the public do support. The way that a lot of the public support universities is sort of affiliation with the sports team, not with the English department is doing. It breaks my heart, but I do think that I do have some hope that these questions around student athletes and unionization of student athletes is going to help sort of move the conversation forward too.
Do you want to say something? Yeah.
Thank you. I agree with so much of what has been said here that I'm having a hard time thinking about what's missing. So here's what I think is missing, and I think that maybe this can connect what some of the people have said. To me, what's missing is the combined voice of students as workers and faculty as workers. If I remember correctly, I think that most people who are students in community colleges are also at work somewhere. They have part-time jobs, sometimes 2 or 3. Every time I've taught adult education somewhere, people that I was teaching had full-time jobs or 2 part-time jobs, plus they had kids, plus they had community responsibilities. Their experience of their jobs and their view of the economy is important knowledge. It is the knowledge that I think needs to be systematized and recognized and listened to and understood and interpreted, and can be done using the inquiry and problem-based approach that you are talking about, Carolyn. In fact, I don't think there's another way to do it because it's raw stuff. It's not the same as studying sociology. I mean, it's raw, fresh, live, cutting-edge stuff, and it can only be excavated and brought up into our shared consciousness if we get the people who are doing it to actually do it.